If, like me, you're attempting to grow tropical plants and you live in a cold, non-tropical climate, then how do you do it? This video is for those who are either starting up from scratch and want to avoid making costly mistakes, or for those who are growing either in a house, in an outbuilding, or in a greenhouse and want to see if they've thought of everything. Not that I'm the world's expert, but if I tell you what I've set up and what I wished I'd done in the first place, then hopefully even experienced growers can pick up some tips, save some money, or even give their own advice down below in the comments. I've written the chapters in the description, so if you'd like to jump around to various sections, feel free to do that, or just hop right to the money-saving tips. I've put them in there too for your convenience, so let's get started. And we are in. Okay, so I'm going to break this down into chronological sections as though I was setting up a grow space from scratch. First up is where you will grow your tropical plants. Your house or apartment is probably most people's first choice as it's already there, and it has the temperatures for tropical plants because most tropical plants are comfortable when you're comfortable. Sometimes it has the light, although not in my case as we're north facing and heavily shaded by mature trees. And if outdoors is generally moderately to highly humid, then indoors will be moderately to highly humid as well. Exception to that, of course, might be if you're trying to grow right near a heat source like a radiator, or if you have air conditioning. Not something that most people in the UK have regular need of, but if you live in a cold area with low humidity, as cold and dry places definitely do exist, so that too would be an exception. In my case, the house wasn't my first choice, partly because plants are messy. Unless you're growing cacti and succulents, which are arid rather than tropical plants anyway, then you're going to have to clear up after them to varying degrees depending on the plant. So while temperatures are generally fine for tropicals in a house, in my case I would have needed additional grow light as my house is so dark inside. Don't let your eyes be the judge regarding light levels. Our eyes are great at adjusting to low light. Get a cheap light meter or even an app and test it for yourself. Plants need light. Even so-called shade-loving plants need probably more light than you'd expect. So while I like to bring the occasional plant indoors throughout the year for short periods, for the most part I decided that growing in the house long term wasn't an option for me. We had a young child and a puppy at the time, so that just ruled it out entirely. But if you do opt for indoors and you happen to have very low humidity, your problems are even greater, as you'd likely need a humidifier, which can then lead to mould. And don't get me started on mold mites, which can take months to eradicate. But if you do manage to overcome these problems, or just don't have the issues that I've mentioned, then of course growing in a house can be a great choice for you. No problem is entirely insurmountable if you have the will and the spare cash. But if the house isn't a consideration, then let's look at other options. So next up is a conservatory or some kind of lean-to construction. The advantages are that they're generally pretty well insulated in the roof and the walls and the windows. They share a very well insulated wall with the house and can have good light and might already be there in the first place. But then the current fashion for solid roofs can remove that light, and yes, our conservatory has a solid roof. But you then have the same issues as a house in that plants are still very messy, and these buildings can be very, very hot in summer and very cold in winter, so you'd likely need shading and heating at various times of the year. You could make it work, but depending how far you get into it, a space with heaters and controllers and humidifiers and grow lights might not be a great place for the family to hang out at the same time. So not out of the question by any means, and cheaper than buying another building, but for me it still didn't work. So this leaves us with a greenhouse or another type of construction. I tried a wooden building that I called my hothouse, which you'll find many videos on the channel all about that. It was great for a couple of years as it was very well insulated. However, wood and moisture don't go together for very long, and eventually the wood started to rot. So if I had to do it all again, I would opt for not a greenhouse. Let me tell you. I would actually opt for a composite outbuilding. I've seen them in Costco amongst other places. So they're plastic, they're relatively cheap, and they can easily be constructed as they're of modular design. They can be easily insulated before filling with plants, and you can add lighting and heating and even humidity without compromising the structure. First money saving tip. So when considering where to grow your tropical plants, start with a single room in the house and work your way outwards. If a room in the house doesn't work, move to the conservatory, maybe a composite outbuilding, and then a greenhouse as your last resort. Now, as you can see, I went for a greenhouse, so let's talk about that. So when choosing a greenhouse, first off, which price range should you go for? Well, if you go cheap, then you'll have plenty of drafts and holes for bugs and slugs to get in. But on the flip side, if you can fill those holes and drafts, you'll pay a fraction of the price. I went for a mid-range one, but it was still a considerable outlay. Should you go for glass or polycarbonate? Well, I went with the glass. I wish I'd gone poly just for the insulation properties. If you're heating it, which you'll have to if you're growing tropical plants, then electricity costs are the big factor. Mine was insulated with horticultural bubble wrap for years, and that's still the cheapest and most effective option for many people, but last year I upgraded to bubble foil insulation. I stapled it to a wooden framework to leave an air gap behind, and this has been a revelation, and my energy bill has more than halved. I have a couple of videos showing how I did this, which I link to in the description. Now, why didn't I cover the entire roof with this bubble foil insulation? Well, that certainly would have saved more cash, but I'm currently prepared to pay the extra in electricity use, as there's nothing better than feeling the sun through the thin skylight on the roof on the rare occasion that it shows itself in the north of England. So another few money saving tips coming up. Do not skimp on or rush the insulation stage. The easiest time to fit insulation is before anything is inside. One layer of the best bubble wrap in the world will not be enough to keep the heat inside for very long. Doing this part right will save you loads of cash in the long run, so I strongly recommend you do the best job you can, and also think that it will be semi-permanent. If I had to do it all over again in a greenhouse, I would choose thick foam cladding that they use in houses. Forget about the light, that can be overcome. Or if you can leave a narrow skylight like I've done, then all the better. It's a compromise, of course. So next up, you need shelving and staging. I have some original costly greenhouse staging in here that went with the greenhouse, but I found other options out there that are cheaper and do a better job, so perhaps look for a mixture to suit your purpose. I found greenhouse shelving to be absolutely useless, and I get far more space and utility from the other options I went for. There are cheap standing shelves, metal meshes to hang things from, metal and plastic bars across the roof, pieces of standing shelves broken up to create tiers. Use your imagination and you'll find all sorts of ways to display plants and make the best use of the space available. Once they're covered with plants, you won't even see what's underneath. Money saving tips? Well, branded greenhouse shelving and staging are the most expensive options. Shop around and you'll find all sorts of options that do a better job for a fraction of the cost. So the next section is all about setting up the tropical environment. What technology will you need? So assuming that you've sorted your insulation, you've sorted where all your plants and storage is going to be, next up is creating the right environment. Don't skimp on this part either, as your plants will die if you do. No matter how much care and attention you give them, tropical plants, of course, do not grow in cold climates for a reason. You'll have to recreate what they do like. So firstly, temperature. You're going to need a heater, or in my case, 2 heaters. I've had very expensive heaters, but I've found that the cheap electrical fan heaters are just as durable and last for years. I've considered all the other heating alternatives for heating this space, but believe me, the easiest, cleanest and simplest option is a fan heater. And I've heard about and looked at every other heating method under the sun, and nothing has convinced me to go for anything else. I'm not saying everyone will agree with that, but for this video, I'm not going to go through all the pros and cons of each. Get your insulation right, and electric fan heaters will be reasonably priced to run. To get more granular control as to when the heaters come on, you'll need a controller, which the heater plugs into. The controller then detects when the temperature is below your set point and switches the fan heater on and then off again when it gets above your set temperature. It's a feedback loop and it works perfectly well 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year. Having two heaters set up provides a backup if one suddenly fails in the middle of the night. Now, why don't we use the fan heater's built-in thermostat? Well, it's simply not accurate enough and it has no digital display of the temperature. A few more money-saving tips. Electric fan heaters made for greenhouses do a great job in that they're reliable and durable and don't cost much if you go for one of the designs that I'm showing you. Don't waste money on expensive ones. They don't last any longer in my experience. The controllers I use are relatively cheap and Chinese made. They generally last a couple of years before I need to replace them. The branded ones are many times more expensive, so I prefer to spend much less at the outset, and so far, 5 years into it, I haven't been disappointed. So that's temperature sorted. Now, as I've blocked out most of the external light, I definitely need supplementary lighting, which I've turned off for the purposes of this video. I'd still need the supplementary lighting even if I hadn't blocked the light out, as the sun rarely makes an appearance here through the autumn and the winter months. So for grow lights, I use a mixture of very cheap off-brand lights and a couple of budget-end branded lights. While branded lights give me the most light, the off-brand lights do provide supplemental light for a fraction of the cost. They're all controlled with smart plugs and I can set and alter from an app on my phone, and they cost pennies to run. The heaters don't cost pennies to run, but that's where the effectiveness of your insulation comes in. The better your insulation, the less you'll have to pay in electricity. So money saving tips, any extra light you can give your plants is a step in the right direction, so don't assume that you need expensive grow lights to begin with. Ironically, preventing light bleed by blocking up the windows actually helps, as will moving the lights closer to the plants. I'll link a video all about grow lights in the description. So, humidity. In the north of England, we don't generally get below around 70% for most of the year, so the vast majority of the tropical plants are fine with that humidity level. It's only since I started growing some particularly humidity sensitive begonias that I've begun to run my hydrofogger again, and that's just in the summer months. So a hydrofogger is a fancy type of humidifier, again controlled by an external controller, but this time one that detects humidity. I don't currently have one set up while it's winter. Hydrofoggers are very expensive, but you can probably add several of the cheaper humidifiers in its place. Leaving standing water, of course, can help, or placing plants on stones over trays of water can all help to increase humidity around a plant. The lengths you'll need to go to there very much depend on the plants you're growing and your natural humidity levels. So money saving tips, hydrofoggers are great in that they do a wonderful job and are very durable, but they are expensive in the first place. There are very cheap humidifiers available which will at least tie you over until you can save up for a hydrofogger. But think carefully about what plants you'll grow, how sensitive they are to humidity and how low your humidity really does go, crucially for how long, as even humidity sensitive plants are rarely troubled by the odd period of low humidity. It's all about degrees and shades of grey. If you live in a cold climate that has weeks of very low humidity, say consistently below 40%, then you'll likely need to do something to address this issue. So now you've got a place to grow your plants, which is well insulated, well lit, and the temperatures that don't go below around 12 degrees, and with medium to high humidity. I've chosen 12 degrees because that seems to be about the sweet spot for most common plants that people grow in houses. All you need next are plants. So tell me in the comments if you have any questions. Where are you in your tropical plants growing journey? Have any of these ideas helped you? Or if you have some ingenious money-saving ideas and hacks that I haven't thought of that might save us all time and money, and of course help to grow these wonderful tropical plants. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.